explain the importance of movement in our city. Movement of people, movement of freight, movement of air, movement of light, movement of water, and movement of noise. The holistic approach to the rebuild of this city is absolutely fundamental and involves spaces and places. Finally, we'd like to comment on the need for our city to have an aspiration. What do we really want Christchurch to be? What do we want Christchurch to do? What do we want Christchurch to stand for? How does that fit in with an aspiration for our region, Canterbury? And where are the interdependencies between the aspiration of our region and the aspiration of our city? It's a compelling proposition, and we need to make sure we get that right. And where does Christchurch fit in terms of its role in the wider South Island, and its role with New Zealand, and in its role internationally? Really important considerations in the context of the LTP. We need to better define what we aspire to do so that we can become the most attractive and livable city in Australasia, where people, including our children and our grandchildren, choose to live. The Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce is committed to assist the Christchurch City Council to returning to delivering the highest possible levels of service to its people, our community, and you can be assured of our support in this quest. So those are my opening remarks, and I'm very happy to take any questions on the written submission, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I was going to start with the libraries one, because I too read the coverage of your submission and then read your submission, and I felt that they were two different things. So the way that I read it was that it wasn't necessary for the council to be the owner of assets, and then I know that there was a letter to the editor which made the point that the Eastgate Library, or the Linwood Library, is now hosted by the Eastgate Mall, and the council doesn't own the Eastgate Mall, and actually the feedback that we've had from a lot of our users of that library service is that they love the fact that it's in the mall. So I really would like to, so I'm glad that you've highlighted it, but I kind of wanted to double highlight it because it takes away from the importance of the rest of your submission, which is focused, in my view, on your point around the risks associated with something that says sweating the assets. That actually means deferring repairs to core infrastructure. And I really want to kind of explore around the risks that are associated with that and what that might mean for the local business community that you represent.
Yeah, we share your concern exactly. And we are unashamedly emphasising the sale of assets to realise capital, which can benefit the entire community, as well as positioning those assets strategically so that we don't have to sweat assets, so that we don't have to have unsustainable rate increases. It's a time to make that consideration. And we understand that the City Council has a real challenge on its hands to persuade the community at large that that is the right thing to do. And from my perspective, and from the perspective of all of us at the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce, we want to help where we can to make sure that people do understand that that is a proposition that we need to consider in the context of, one, the long-term interests of our city, and two, the fact that we have very little alternative.
And with the question of I mean, you talked about strategic equity partners in terms of some of those assets. So you're not seeing that just as a straight-out sale to anyone or a fire sale approach. You're actually talking about looking for some sort of strategic alliance. Can you explore that?
Absolutely. As I said, the short game is solving your problem, and it's eminently solvable, the financial shortfall. You've got an enormous balance sheet. The long game is how we position those assets to make Christchurch more internationally significant. In other words, introduce equity partners into the port or the airport or anything else you might be considering to sell that adds more value than just the equity. For example, you might be able to introduce a strategic partner that can add really state-of-the-art technology to those assets that makes them work even better than they do. You might be able to produce a partner that provides connectivity with other parts of the world through those assets so that we protect their utilisation. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that the Port of Tauranga has invested in the Port of Timaru, and that they're using the Port of Timaru as a feeder into the Port of Tauranga, and we're sitting with our port in isolation in between. I'm very conscious of the fact that Auckland Airport has invested into Queenstown Airport, and there are now more trans-Tasman flights at peak going into Queenstown than there are coming into Christchurch. We need to think long-term about how we position our assets so that they benefit our community long-term.
So are you saying that there's actually potentially some risks by not looking for strategic alliances that might in fact diminish the value of the asset over time to the city and the region?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly what we're saying, and we would be saying that earthquake or no earthquake. But we have an opportunity now to get a double whammy, if you like, to resolve our financial problems and to add real value to this city's assets long term.
Okay. Is there any other questions that people... Pauline?
Thanks, Peter. Just on your submission page 10.6, if extra capital was made available, you suggest perhaps we bring forward some of the anchor projects. I'm just wondering, have you got any specific projects that you think would be ones to bring forward that you've named?
Well, yeah, at the moment we're sort of looking at delays in those anchor projects, and we need to get them back on track as much as we can. I think it's really disappointing to see continuous delay. We have a little priority list of assets. I don't want to go through them today, but happy to talk about that in detail later on. The important thing is the choices the council can make if it gets more money from its asset sales than it requires to address its immediate problem. And those are some critical choices that you as councillors will have to make, and they are vitally important choices.
Wondering what your priority anchor projects might be.
Well, if you want my priorities, I'm really pleased with the way the Justice Precinct is developing, and that's going to happen. The bus exchange is very integral in that process because of the land the temporary exchange is currently on, so that's a no-brainer. Next, we're looking. I would be looking at the health precinct and saying we need to really make sure that we get that health precinct operating efficiently, because that impacts our community welfare, it impacts our economy, and it impacts a significant part of what we're doing in the context of a $1.4 billion Canterbury health budget and all the ensuing benefits that can be gained from that. The Metro Sports facility, be good to see that advanced. I mean, we would have to say that down our list is the sports stadium, because there are other priorities in our community that need to be addressed. We want to see the memorial finished, we want to see the river continue to be developed. The river precinct must be the linkage between Hagley Park and the sea, and must be accessible along its whole conduit, and will be a beautiful part of the redevelopment of our city. So, you know, every redevelopment has its benefits and its timeframes, and we all want it to happen immediately. It's not going to happen immediately. We'll see it phase through.
Yep. Yanni?
Thank you. Yeah, I was interested in your thoughts around the library. Have you seen our detailed business case that Deloitte's did over the library, and seen the proposal that is similar to the one that you're recommending, what that would do in terms of cost to the city?
I'm privy to the fact that if the council could borrow more money, it is the best proposition for the council is to own its own libraries. The council is not in a position to borrow more money at the moment. So that would again reinforce that if you want to make decisions about retaining some of those core assets such as library buildings, and there's no reason why you shouldn't if you had the ability on your balance sheet to accommodate that, then you need to think hard about selling assets, because then you can realise the cash that will put you in a position where you can finance some of those other things you want to finance and not have to make those hard decisions.
Yeah, I guess if I read through what you're proposing, it's my understanding that will effectively increase rates. It puts together a large degree of uncertainty as to the rent costs, and we're also funding a developer's profit margin. So
you're talking about libraries.
The library, if we have a private developer build it and we lease it. So it seems
all
like
we were saying, yeah,
huge cost.
Let me make it very clear. Yeah. All we were saying, and we were using the library as an example, the torch paper, and that's okay. But all we were saying was that the council doesn't need to own all of its hardcore assets. If it has to make some really hard choices in terms of where it's going to get the cash from to fund its future, it doesn't have to own everything. So that was the point we were making. Now, of course, there is a marginal benefit if the council can borrow at rates that the private sector can't and own its own assets. That's great. But you're not in that situation. So there's some calls you're going to have to make here in terms of, do we sell assets? Do we have to own all the property we own? Do we have to own all the buildings we own? Or are there other ways that we can work, as we've said right at the start, and work in the interests of this community long term to get the best possible levels of service from the council through to its community? Are there other ways of approaching this?
I appreciate that. And just
Phil.
sorry.
No, yeah, Phil.
Thanks, Peter. I just want a bit of clarification about any say, cost and benefit analysis where, for example, a major library, and I don't mean the suburban ones, when a city has, used the formula that you've outlined, and especially if there's any studies showing the success or otherwise on a comparative basis. For example, comparing those libraries, central libraries, with libraries that are publicly owned.
I don't know why you're getting distracted into the service offering of the library. We're not even suggesting that we look at. Can I speak? We're not even suggesting that the service offering be compromised in any way at all. What we were suggesting was that if you have an asset, it could be a library, it could be a community centre, it could be a town hall, it could be anything. If it comes down to a choice of having that service or not having that service because you can't afford to own the asset that's in and you don't need to own the asset to provide the service, what's your decision going to be?
Yeah. No, but I think that the question was asked and answered by Councillor Johansson, and actually asked and answered when I put the question. It wasn't. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the submitter.
Can I just suggest that there are much bigger things we need to deal with in the context of our submission than one line that says that the council doesn't need to own all of its assets.
Yeah, I know. So, are there any other issues, Jimmy?
Two questions regarding to the asset sales, because you particularly emphasized during the deputation, to sell assets can achieve the community outcome, etc. You mentioned like a healthy, livable, and economic benefit to the city. But my question is, the first one is regarding to the definition of the strategic assets. If we review the Local Government Act, the strategic assets is assets that a council needs to return to achieve or to promote important outcome for the community. So my question is, if you sell assets, you are not keep the asset, how to achieve this community outcome?
Yeah, well, you don't need to sell the entire asset, so you can still maintain control of the asset. You just don't need to have all of your equity in it. That's one way of doing it. There are assets the council owns in highly regulated areas which are completely regulated, which the council could sell without losing any of that regulated capacity. And can I just remind councillors that when I came to the city, the council had just sold its abattoir. And its abattoir, the proceeds of the abattoir were used to fund the Canterbury Development Corporation's beginnings. So who would suggest today that the council should own abattoirs? Things change, things move on, and we don't have to own all of the assets that provide services to our community.
Thank you. Second question. Second question regarding the timing. You emphasize to sell assets, but at the moment still some of the factor is uncertainty. For instance, a moment regarding to the capital program, council is still undertaking to review all those the capital programs. Maybe some program is not urgent and can be deferred. Even some program probably less important can be the kind of the cancel, etc. And also regarding to the horizontal instruction, still underground, some information still not yet come out. And also regarding to the cost sharing agreement, the council with the central government, as well as insurance, etc. All those factors not yet, to be the certainty. So why you assume right now is a good timing to sell those assets? Yeah.
The thing that we find really concerning about this LTP is that there are so many uncertainties. There are so many unknowns in terms of insurance, or in terms of the cost-sharing agreement, or in terms of the costs of developing future capital assets, whatever it might be. None of those are playing into the council's hands. And in my assessment, every one of those is going to bite you rather than stroke you. It's going to be more expensive than you thought, not less expensive. So, and we have said in our submission that the council has no wriggle room, even in the context of this plan, it has no wriggle room. So we need to be working very quickly to assess the options, to realise capital, to make sure that you don't get caught, and to make sure that we are working as a council in the long-term interests of our community. There is no time to waste, but there is also a need to make sure that if we do go down the asset sale route, that is done in a way that is strategic and provides the best possible outcome in terms of the sale of whatever part of the asset you decide to sell, and positions those assets to benefit the community long term.
I kind of wanted to pick up another part of your submission, because you talk about transformational opportunities as picking up on language that we used in the consultation document around regenerating and redeveloping the residential red zone, creating a world-class network of cycleways and shifting transport options, but also restoring the Avon and Heathcote rivers. So these are kind of the transformational things that we've kind of put on the table. But you've added to that the opportunity to create multiple new commercial delivery vehicles that could work in partnership with the private sector, and I presume central government as well, to develop precincts, you know. And I really liked that idea, because it moves away from the idea that an anchor project sits in isolation, and it also moves away from the idea that the central city is somehow separate from the rest of the city. And so that was one. The second was the Port of Littleton and the transformational changes that can be enabled there through the recovery plan. And the third was the support of the introduction of new technologies to improve asset management, and demand forecasting, the sensor technology, and of course Sensing City was enormous in that regard. So I just think that, you know, I really kind of wanted to say thank you, but did you want to speak to any of those?
Just only what I said in my introduction, that we're talking about spaces and places, and the spaces are our whole city and how that all fits in together. And also the opportunity. I mean, we have opportunity here now to do what needs to be done in a way that has never been done before, in a way that we could never have even dreamt of in the past. All of the tragedy of these events aside, we have enormous opportunity. That opportunity is in our hands. It's not in anyone else's hands. And if we screw it up, it's our fault, no one else's. So from my perspective, my organisation is going to work really hard to ensure that we optimise those opportunities, and that we do ensure that we have a city that just can't be matched anywhere else in the world when we reach the next few stages of our journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think that's an extremely positive note to end on. Thank you very much to all of the trouble that you've gone to put the submission together, and thank you for your offer of supporting the city as we work through all of these challenging issues. Thank you very much.
Good luck with the 3,000 odd or whatever the submissions you've got to go through. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and I should say that the live streaming came on during that submission, so you'll be able to reflect on that. But I will comment on the live streaming, because this is the first time that we've had an LTP in Christchurch where the submissions are live streamed, and so I think that's an extremely positive advance in terms of democracy and accountability. And I'd like to acknowledge Jana Johansson, who I know in the previous council was a strong supporter of getting this live streaming online. But what it also enables us to do is that if individual councillors can't be present for any part of the submissions, it does mean that they can play it back and actually catch up on all of the submissions. And I have an undertaking from all of the councillors that they are willing to do that. Obviously, there are some people who, for whatever reason, will have to be absent for small periods of time, and that certainly I think should be a great comfort to people. So could I now invite the Central City Business Association to come forward?